I picked up this snowblower that has a couple issues, and as you can see, blowing snow to the left, it throws it about 4 to 5 feet. It's really not that far. And blowing snow to the right, it's about 6 to 8 feet. It's still not performing as well as I think a snowblower of this size should. It's a 10 horsepower, 33-inch snowblower with a 12-inch impeller housing. It had a few issues that I think were impeding its ability to perform well as I added some rubber paddles to it to give it a little bit more power to throw the snow. And these are from January of 2021. I wanted to have a before and after, even though this is going to be two separate winters. I wanted to show that the fixes did have an improvement to the performance of the snowblower. And that just comes out, and then set that aside. Belt can come up and off. Oh, you do have to take both these off because they're both in the way. Just needed to disconnect the right there. That holds onto the frame or the handles with one bolt. It's the crank for turning the chute left and right. Just need to take that off, and actually so there's the 4 bolts. There's 2 here and then 2 on the other side, and this one I took off, and this one actually is just a pin on this model. And what happens is the bottom side is slotted. Just sits in there, so that's how it goes back, is you can get it positioned right, tilt it in, and then put these bolts in. To get this apart, you get the auger out, there's this bolt right here, but then on the underside there's a collar that goes on the shaft for the auger, and you need to take that off with an Allen set screw, and so both of those have to end up coming off. But the Allen screw a lot of times gets rusted in there, so we'll see. I might end up having to drill it out. And these, since this spins, obviously you saw it spin a little bit, they're easiest to take off with an impact. Can't really put it all in there, but it's all kinds of kind of hard to see at this point, but right there's actually a key, which makes sense. You got a spinning shaft on another spinning concentric shaft of some kind, or a pulley. Probably don't want it to slip, so it's going to be keyed. I think the key is what's really keeping that on there, but I'm going to keep heating it up, keep pulling on it, just keep doing that until it comes off. It is coming off a little at a time, so it'll eventually get there. There's a collar on these. There's almost always a collar. It helps keep the shaft from moving, but it's in there with set screws, and they're just Allen screws. You take them out. Sometimes you have to drill them out just because they're so rusted that they're going to strip and break apart. But take the key off, take the collar off, and then there's on the sides, you take the auger impeller wheels bolts off of the sides, and then the whole thing should slide out, and just slide it there. I'm going to keep this bearing on though. There's the difference between a cleaned up housing and the dirty housing before. This is all nasty grease in here that, if I can get something to just show, this is caked in here. Had to clean it out of the other side. So I'll clean both of these up and then I'll put them back together. But you can see here, this was I think it's just a cork gasket before. And what I'm going to do is put RTV in there instead. And you can see the ridge where it sits. And that's where I'll put the RTV as well, all the way around here. And then when it gets over here, there's a seal for the shaft that sits right in there. The RTV will meet up with that. So instead of using the cork or the paper gaskets, we'll have RTV, and then I'll probably put some a little bit on the flange too, just to make sure this really seals up. All right, they're both cleaned up, ready to go. Put this new seals in. I don't know if these are the right size. We'll find out. And then after that, I'll straighten the impeller fan blades and put it all back together. Here's just a look at the seal, one without, one with. This is the new seal, and this is without a seal. Here is the original seal. And this one is actually, the old one is thinner than the new one. Here's the new one. That's how thick that one is. Here's the old one. That's how thick that one is. So you can see they're much different size. And what happens with that is this will sit out ever so slightly. Before, the old one sat in just a little bit. This one sits out just a little bit, and that's okay. What matters is the sealing lip on this sat all the way at the back. You can see, if it focuses on it, the lip sits basically at the back of the edge of the housing, and so does this one. It sits pretty much all the way back. It's maybe just a little bit off, but that matters because then when the shaft is sitting in this, it'll still seal because the shaft does not pop out of this housing at all. And so you want this inner lip here to ride on the shaft that is doing the sealing. So I think these will still work. They'll be fine. They'll just sit out a little bit. And then there's a washer that sat over this anyway for protecting that from the spinning of like snow and stuff, so it didn't, push its way in. All right, both of the new seals are in. They, like I said, sit out just a tiny bit in each one. It's going to be just a little bit protruding. That's okay. I knew that when I bought the seals. I could not find this exact seal for the life of me, either in dimensions, by name. There's not even markings on what brand this is. So it was hard finding these seals alone. And then when these housings go together, I got a new seal for that shaft, which this one is easy to find because it's pretty common size. But that will sit right here, and it kind of just gets wedged in there between the two halves. It doesn't really have a specific like metal housing that it needs to be pressed in like these ones on the side. This one just kind of sits in a groove, and then the other side of the housing just kind of sits on top. If I can get these together. And it would be something like that with a bunch of RTV. Everything's sealed up again and ready to go. I'm going to leak test this before I assemble everything, so I'm just going to put some fluid in there and let it sit for a little bit, make sure nothing leaks, and if it checks out, then I'm going to start putting it all back together. Bent all the metal back and then welded it. Welds are absolutely terrible because I'm not a welder. I don't really care as long as it's functional. And so all these were actually broken right here, and I just welded them so that they stay and hopefully don't break again, because they were. Here's the original weld right here, and I just continued it up. But you can see where they were bent over right here. I bent them back, it made a weak spot right here, but it'll be fine because I'm going to be putting pads on it anyway. And so here's the pads. They'll sit in here like this. They're purposely a little long because they're only going to stick out a little bit, like that much. You can see how much it's sticking out. And that's on purpose because the bolts are going to be right here. I'm going to drill 2 holes for them to hold it. And when this edge wears out, I want to be able to slide it up a little bit, cut a fresh edge, and have a second life out of these pads, so I can get basically 2 uses out of them. I'm drilling the holes. Just make sure you punch a center or a pilot. You can either use a really small drill bit and make a pilot hole, or you can use a center punch and punch a little notch into the metal so the bit doesn't walk. And then this is what it will look like. Now we got 2 holes for our pads and the bolts, and let's finish up doing the rest of those. I like putting the bolts back here instead of up here, just in case this piece decides to bend over again and like this weld breaks, which it wouldn't surprise me how bad that is. But the bolts being here, if this bends over, and imagine worst case scenario, bends in 90 degrees. Now the head of the bolt, or the nut of the bolt, is now facing into the housing that would be like right here.
it'd just make it painful to try and remove it. Whereas back here, this part's not likely to bend, and it's a little closer to the center that should be able to be easy to reach coming down it through the chute if you wanted to come in that way instead of from the front. The housing is now reconnected to the motor. Remember, there was this pin down here, it just kind of hinged on, and then these ones just held it on each side. On this side, it's on the outside, and the bar is on the inside of the other one. So it just sits in there. They're equal width. This yellow piece to the other side is the same width as this black piece to the other side. But then, yeah, reconnect this bolt and this one that hold the pulley in here, or the belt. Make sure that this works again. Just tighten it up and then make sure that the brake there also gets applied. And then put the shroud back on and try it out, see if it works. To get just a little bit of a distance between the paddle, the new rubber piece, and the floor, I just had it sit down there on a piece of cardboard, and that should give just a tiny little air gap, but still let it ride close enough that it'll effectively scrape the housing. So I got the paddles installed, or the rubber mats, whatever you want to call them, and you can see there's a slight edge on the right side there, and that's from spinning around. I ran it for a little bit and just let it kind of wear down its own natural groove that'll ride on the housing at some point. You know, the housing is not going to be 100% round, and so there's going to be high and low spots. And just running it for a little bit kind of wears that down enough that you can get a natural edge that meets the housing. And you can see there's just a tiny little gap there, and that's from the cardboard that I had originally, plus the wearing down of letting it run.